Imagine you slowly start to forget things that were important to you, such as family, friends, and other loved ones. You also start to forget things that you also start to be confused by things that did not confuse you before. You also find yourself having difficulty communicating. You can feel your body slowly shutting down. This is not what anyone wants for themselves or for their loved ones. Unfortunately, this is a reality for millions of Americans living with Alzheimer's. In fact, according to senior behavioral and social scientists, Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States overall, and the 5th leading cause of death for those aged 65 and older. My Nana had Alzheimer's, so I have witnessed firsthand just how horrible and ruthless this disease can be. I've also seen how difficult it can be, not only on the person who has it, but also their loved ones, to see someone they love suffer. I will never forget the first time my Nana forgot who I was. She looked at me with a confused look, asking who I was. It was in that moment that I realized how real and destructive Alzheimer's was. My family and I saw her slowly slip away from us. I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. With that said, over the course of this speech, I will demonstrate the need for more funding from the U.S. federal government for Alzheimer's research by discussing 3 points: the rapid increase in Alzheimer's cases, what a future without Alzheimer's disease will look like, and what you can do to help this terrible disease. First, we will discuss the problem, the prevalence of Alzheimer's in the United States. According to the National Institute of Health, as many as 5 million Americans aged 65 and older have the disease. And as people start to live longer, that number is just going to increase and increase rapidly. In fact, it is estimated that by 2050, 13.8 million Americans will have Alzheimer's. At that rate, that will over double the number of people living with Alzheimer's in the U.S. According to the Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's care costs $236 billion a year, and the government spends less than 1% of that funding on research. In other words, there is a major discrepancy between the number of people living with Alzheimer's and the funding that goes into finding a cure for the disease. There is such a discrepancy between the two that Jessica Gwynn, writer for Alzheimer's.net and former employee at Delaware Valley Alzheimer's Association, states, biomedical scientists doing early stage drug development for Alzheimer's raise concerns that research funding is disproportionately low and risks putting labs developing treatments for the neurological disease in a funding limbo. The fact that scientists who have dedicated their lives to finding a cure for the disease do not have the funding they need proves that the funding for Alzheimer's is not sufficient enough and must be proved upon. Kathleen Hayden, an associate professor of social sciences and health policy in the School of Medicine at Wake Forest University, states, the projected increase in Alzheimer's and dementia cases over the next 30 years will prove overwhelming for a healthcare system that is ill-equipped to manage treatment, care, and costs. In other words, if we continue on as we do now, it is just going to become more and more difficult until it is almost impossible to cure Alzheimer's. Many people think Alzheimer's is just memory loss, but it's so much more than that. The disease ultimately kills my Nana and millions of other people across the world and the U.S. No one survives Alzheimer's. As chairman and co-founder of the USA Against Alzheimer's Network, George Brandenburg states, increased research funding can serve as a rallying point for advocates, researchers, industry, and our nation in the fight against Alzheimer's. We need to get serious about fighting Alzheimer's. The time to get serious is now. It's only going to get worse. We have discussed the need for more funding for Alzheimer's research. Now we will discuss what the world without Alzheimer's would look like. I want you to imagine a world where Alzheimer's is non-existent. No one is suffering, no one is dying from Alzheimer's. There is no need for spending on the prevention, care, and treatment and research of Alzheimer's. People live longer, enjoying life with their loved ones. There's no major forgetfulness, confusion, or difficulty communicating to interfere with their lives. This is a future that everyone who knows someone with Alzheimer's wants. But how can this happen? Everyone working together is a start. As Brandenburg says, if we are serious about stopping this disease for future generations, The legislative and executive branches, industry, and scientists must continue to work together to provide the innovations and the resources needed to meet that goal. To conclude, we have discussed the prevalence of Alzheimer's, the Alzheimer's crisis, and a world without Alzheimer's. After all this, you may be wondering, yes, this is a problem, but what does it have to do with me? But we all will know someone affected by Alzheimer's in our lives. Therefore, this issue should be personal to all of us. You may also be thinking, I'm only one person, what can I do? You can do a lot. This brings me to my final point. If you remember one thing from this speech, make it this. We cannot ignore Alzheimer's any longer. Advocate for those who can't. Be the voices for those who suffer from Alzheimer's. For those of you who know someone affected by the disease, share your story. Through this advocacy and story sharing, we can work together to help raise awareness of this horrible disease and make it a thing of the past. Thank you.
Okay.